Where are the low value men? Like, what are all the low value men up to during these trying times? Because the high value men, I know they're around. They won't shut the fuck up. Low value men, I have not heard a word out of. I'm starting to think I'm on their side. I think I want one of those. I want a low value man. They don't make podcasts. I haven't seen one low value man make a podcast. Do they not know how to use microphones? Maybe that's a good thing. That's hot. All right, I've never seen a man use a microphone for good.
Until now, everybody buckle up. It's low value mail time with your host, Danny Polishchuk. Okay, what is happening, everybody? Welcome back to Low Value Mail. It's been a minute. It's only been a week. I've only been gone a week. Shout out to anybody who came through Philly last week. Tuesday and Wednesday. We were there, me, Ryan, JJ. Fun times at Helium Philly. Doing a little stand-up comedy jokes. But we are back with episode 61. Can you believe it? We made it this far. Episode 61 of Low Value Mail on this Tuesday, April. What the hell? What the heck? Not a good start, folks. Not a good start. Tuesday, May 9th, 2023 in the year of our Lord. I think I've just had a series of mini strokes, but I'm back. Maybe. We'll see how long that lasts. Thank you, anybody who just caught me over on Primetime 69, Pimp on the Blimp. That was a fun time. And today's guest is the one and only. I've been trying to make this happen for a hot minute. My man, Andreas Xirtus. If you don't know him, this is a quick bio. He's worked for NASA on the Janus project and as a stoichiometry technician on the atomic force microscope at the Stanford AFM lab, and ran social media strategy for CNN, through flight 370, and then before his time in, I don't know what it is, I'm reading his bio, and then him and Ian and I worked at the Peruvian government until our boss, the President Alan Garcia, was suicided. So anyways, he's a fascinating cat. He's called in on previous episodes of Low Value Mail. If you've watched since the beginning, you've heard him. But finally, we have him on as a guest because he has his own show that he does on Tuesday nights at this exact time. And I said, there's got to be a better way. Oh, I'm all cut off over here. You can't see my arm. Whatever. It's not important. I'm just going to be not a lot of hand motions, and we'll be good. So anyways, Andreas is going to be joining us very shortly. As always, you can call in and ask him any questions you shall like. Once the phone lines are open, 1-888-949-2969. That is the scrote line right there. That is for all the scrotes, specifically the Canadian scrotes, who are constantly getting boned. You know who you are. Oh, you know what? I think I just cut this off too. My body's just way too cut off here. I don't think I need to be cutting myself off. I just am choosing to. All right, see, we fixed it. Much better. Look at that. Got the hands back. All right, a few things before we get started. Before we bring Andreas on. As always, please like and subscribe. I'm gonna give away 100. I'm gonna give away a channel membership, a Scrote channel membership, at 100 likes tonight. That gives you access to all these weird emojis and stuff, as well as the after show. It's a 1-month membership courtesy of me, but YouTube chooses who gets it. So if you don't get it, don't blame me. Don't go in the chat being like, pick me. It's desperate, it's weak, it's pathetic, and more importantly, I can't do anything about it. So but please just tell a friend. Telling a friend's probably actually the best thing you could do, but then they're probably like, the more you start explaining the show, they're like, I don't know if we can really be friends anymore. You seem like a fucking lunatic. So maybe don't tell a friend. But as always, you can support the show on Patreon, Locals, YouTube. And once I hit 500 subscribers, I'm going to I don't even know yet, but I'm probably let you all decide. I'm either going to make this show longer or maybe I'm going to add an afternoon show. I remember originally I was going to do an afternoon show, so maybe I'm going to do that because we have all the Australians and all the people that live in shit countries are like can't watch the show live. And I'm not just talking about Australia as a shit country. It's every country that's not America. That includes you, Canada. Looking at you, Canada. So anyways, and also so big news today, Tucker Carlson's show is basically coming back. He gave up $25 million so that he can come back on Twitter, which makes me think that Twitter is going to be the new game in town. I'll bet money on it that Twitter is going to be the new game in town. So if you want to go subscribe to me on Twitter, I currently have 0 subscribers because I don't really know what to do with Twitter. I'm actually figuring out a private RSS feed so that I could put up, because the only real benefit that you get on Patreon is that you get access to this RSS feed. And so I was like, wait, and eventually Twitter will probably have that available. But for now, I'm going to put a private RSS feed on Twitter so you can get basically all the benefits that you get from Patreon or local, and more than you get on YouTube, on Twitter. And then also, if you go subscribe to me over on Twitter, 2 people who subscribe will get a free Low Value Mail shirt of their choice. So it's $5 to subscribe, and those shirts are whatever, $20. So it's a good deal. Anyways, you don't have to do it. If you just like to watch the show, whatever, that's it. Next, tomorrow, going to be back with a new episode of The Bathhouse. We've been off for 2 weeks. Week 1 was not my fault. It was that tyrant Tim Dillon. He's a good man, but they wouldn't allow me in the green room. So there's that. And then last week I was in Philadelphia. We'll be back tomorrow night, 10:30 p.m. with Karen Fian, Andre Kim. Karen Fian, the mukbang queen. If you saw her last appearance, she ate a whole fucking pizza during the show. Andre Kim and Michael Turner. And then if you want to see me on the road doing stand-up, I'm going to be doing more road dates. Go sign up for my mailing list. It might be below. I don't know. Anyways, go find it. Okay. That is it for that. And then if you any super chats, I'll ask Andreas. If you have any questions for Andreas. Also, if you sign up for the Patreon, you can ask him. You can get priority kind of questions for the guests. But if you don't want to do that, you can just do a super chat and I'll ask him. All right. Enough shit talking. Andreas, hold on a moment while I snazzy this up. I don't have a producer, but you all know that. You all know I don't have a producer. Boom! Hold on. No audio, though. Ask to unmute. Unmute me, you son of a bitch. Hey! What's up? Welcome to Low Value Mail, Andreas Excertus. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very excited for this episode. How are you doing, man?
I'm pretty good. It's a nice. I shuffled some things around to do the show.
I know. I've been trying to make this happen for a minute, but you literally have a show at the exact same time.
Well, the eclipses. There's an hour beforehand, so I like to jump in right afterwards and call you up and give you some.
Exactly. but there's an overlap. But yeah. So, anyways, I'm excited for this. I think a lot of people are excited for this. Are you okay?
Yeah. You can hear me coughing, really?
No, I couldn't hear you coughing.
Oh, I muted myself to cough. Yeah, no.
Oh, okay. I thought that was like a cool Zoom feature.
Some people are excited because they like the idea of Tartaria, and a lot of people are like, "What is this? Who cares?"
I have some patron questions about Tartaria, but before we get to any questions, okay, you just got to give me the quick, not the quick down though. We have some time. We're gonna open the phone lines in about 20.
Yeah, but open the paragraph thing.
Yeah, let's hear, because I never heard of Tartaria until you called into Low Value Mail probably 6 months ago or something. And then
I tried not to push it too hard when I first met you because I was like, "Oh, you're a Polish Chuck." So
yeah, well, that's another thing is we were talking, and then you were like, because of my last name, and you're like, "Is this have to do with what was it like these swamp people from
the Polish Chucks?" The Polish Chucks, the Poles that live in the Ukrainian East or the West. I'm sorry, so the Northwest. Yeah. And the whole region, we'll get into all that, but it's interesting to me, like where people come from. I mean, basically, if someone asked me what we're going to talk about today, I'd say we're talking about the most important thing. And who's it most important to? It's most important to everybody. This is the thing that impacts everybody the most. And when's it the most important to talk about it? Actually, now, more than last year, this week is actually more important. It's surprisingly important this week, what's going on in international politics. And this affects everybody. And a big question I'd ask back, if anyone asks why does it matter, is how well do you know your life, your family, your ancestors? And if you compare that to the elite, because you could check directly proportional to how many journals and diaries of your grandparents and great grandparents you have and you've read, how successful your family is. And they've really done a great job taking people and turning them into orphans and foundlings century after century and saying, hey, you just want to forget about the past and live today. Check to check, pension to pension, and not have anything to save for your children tomorrow. But what's crazy is all of the world that we're living in, it's a stolen world. Everything that we have is stolen, and they're trying to make sure that it's stolen because there's a reset coming. And it's like we think to ourselves, oh, it's too late, right? It's too late. It's not too late. That's the craziest thing about it. And it all comes down to these historic treaties and deals that were made with the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Astors and everything else, and they still matter.
I mean, my studio. It's funny. I was just reading about the Astors because my studio is right near Astor Place.
Wow.
In New York City, in Manhattan. And then I didn't realize like Astor, like that's Astoria is like all of Queens and the Waldorf Astoria and all that shit. That's the Astor family. Yeah.
And you think about how crazy the Astor family is. I mean, obviously, if you watch Titanic, there's that scene where they're like, would you like a glass of brandy? And we've decided to dress our best and go down with the ship. That's Guggenheim and Astor. And Astor had gotten all of his money. I mean, he played into the Spanish-American War, which is how they swallowed up California and the gold, which they used to finance the Civil War, which they used to destroy the South, which was really, I mean, you have sweatshops in the North. The South was used to take all the money out of the hands of these investing families. And then so Astor had propped himself up. They didn't like it. And they made sure he died on what was probably the Britannic or the Olympic.
Because it wasn't, right? I've heard that someone on the show said that once, that was actually a fake Titanic.
Well, so the ship of Theseus thing, where if you take enough parts from one boat and put it into another boat, then is it the same boat? Like if you rebuild another boat, take every piece off of it and put a new piece on, replacing it piece by piece, and then you reassemble the leftover pieces. Which one is the ship of Theseus? Right. And that's great for insurance, right? The Olympic ran for 35 years. It was called the ship that never broke. It just kept on going. So, but
that's because they just kept repairing it.
Yeah, and replacing parts of the other ship. And so they destroyed the wealth of these families that were involved with the opium wars, like these huge pharmaceutical families that exist today. The Astors were one of them, but there's other, families that were, for instance, like the Delano family or the Forbes family or the Russell family. Like these are the Perkins family. These all got huge amounts of money from the opiate wars. And kind of the world we're living in today is run by these families that controlled us through drugs, and the fentanyl crisis that's happening now, still controlled by the same pharmaceutical families. All these things are just families that have been controlling the world for centuries, and they figured out how to own people.
Interesting. And so how does this tie into Tartaria?
So, all right. So
I guess for people who have never heard of it.
Yeah.
Because there will be some of those.
Right. Let's say. Okay. So I worked for CNN. I've been around the world a lot. I was really interested in history. And as I started traveling, I'd start to find out there's other versions of this story. It's not just his story, the story of the people who won. And this is a big thing today, the 1619 Project. These people that are saying, really the Netflix. By the way, I wish we lived in the Netflix dimension where everything really was like black George Washington, because he probably was, if we start to look into it, part black. All these nuances to the official story that we were told start to fall apart. And they always mention this idea of this fatherland nation that existed that was lost. You've got the Slavic people always talking about the Tartars. You've got Taurus Bulba, these like myths, and these stories were really popular in England. You have the poem, If I Were the King of Tartary. They used to think that America was Tartary. If you look at the maps, if you drew a picture of here's where we are, but if you go far west or you go far east, it's just Tartary out there. The rest of it's Tartary. And so on one hand, we were taught in school, the first time I ever heard of Tartary, it was because in anthropology class, they said, beware of believing in the vegetable sheep of Tartary. And I was like, what the heck is this? And they said, well, at one point in the 15th century, people believed in this mythical land called Tartary. They thought it was in the Western Hemisphere or in Russia or something, and that they had vegetable sheep. And they're like, what's vegetable sheep? Well, apparently they mean cotton. But they're saying, oh, well, this was so confusing to explain, and it was so misunderstood that people thought that America was this thing. And so as an anthropologist, you should be very careful about misunderstanding things because of this misunderstanding that was Tartary. But as time goes on, we start to find out there really were nomadic plants. You've got places in Polynesia where there are carnivorous plants, Venus flytraps and things like that, that match up with these stories. And that Tartary is also described as being not just, a land, it's an empire. There's a huge government. It's all over the world, essentially. You're like, wait, where is Tartary then? If it's supposed to be in America, it's supposed to be in Russia. And so you start to see that there was a Russian empire, but it wasn't really Russian. The Russians were a people that furthered it. They crossed the strait, the Bering Strait. They ended up in America. And there were Slavic, Scandinavian, and Mongolian people that were interacting with each other. And as time goes on, you call it the Tartarian Empire, but it's really more of a confederacy. You've got people all over the world that were tied together, and they had a culture, and it was an empire in the sense that there was trade going on, endless summer. But we've been told that in the 15th century, people just invented triangular trade, that the Portuguese went to Brazil for the first time, and that they didn't just rediscover a system that existed before it. The thing is, we had a system that existed before it, and there's all this evidence of it. We try to ignore it with the calendars, but that's the other thing. You look at Constantinople, right? And that's why it's so pressing this week, because this week is the election in Turkey. Turkey is weirdly enough the center for all of this. How can I make this quicker?
Interesting, because I saw the big turnout for they had like almost 2 million people,
right? So
out in the streets there. But
so Constantinople was in Turkey, right? And so the Catholic Empire, at one point, you've got Mehmed II took Constantinople and it became Istanbul. And so when Istanbul happens, that's the major destruction of the historical records of the world that we were living in before it. And we have this created idea of Byzantium, of Rome. The Roman Empire it's more of a meme than a real empire, right? Because Byzantium and Rome are two separate empires, but they're not even really empires. And their extensions, we hear about the idea of Pig Latin from Shakespeare's Dog Latin, because Shakespeare created English in the 16th century. We didn't even speak English this way until the 16th century. All of this culture that we live in now was created in the last 400 or 500 years. And even the calendars. So when you look at the calendars, the Russian calendars, when they were trying to correct and synchronize the Gregorian calendar, it was in the 1920s and 30s that they finally started to use the same calendar as us. And there was a lot of difficulty to do it because the dates didn't align. And they were saying, this doesn't make sense. It's like there's 1,000.
How far off was it?
Like about 1,000 years.
Oh.
So what they found was that the Jesuits, after the Catholic Church and Paulicians had to leave Constantinople and they left Istanbul and the Ottoman Empire took Turkey, that they went to Rome and they created a fake history and started trying to ignore the Muslim Empire, right? And the Muslim Empire is an interesting way to call the Ottoman Empire because it wasn't Muslim to begin with, but it's what happened. And as time went on, we created this fake calendar that says that things happened double the time. This happened 1,000 years earlier, right? So there's this might not seem that important now, but if you said that Jesus died 100 years ago, and then you're saying Jesus died 1,900 years ago, right? Jesus died when your grandparents were alive versus Jesus died when your ancestors were alive. This kind of thing was used to disrupt the...
And what's the timeline of Tartaria?
So probably about 1,000 years ago to maybe the 1600s. But even into the 20th century, the Soviet Union was still destroying Tatarstan. And I've done interviews with people all over the world, including in Tatarstan, these Tatar people who their families were imams. They were part of this huge cultural network. If you start to look, it's interesting because they're Muslims. And like, hey, you're this blonde, blue-eyed girl. You're a Muslim? And she's like, yeah, but it's kind of like yoga and identify. Like, it's very different. And so this ancient version of Islam that was at the center of the philosophy and of the academic circle, not the Islam that we see brought out by the soldiers, right? This is the cradled part of it. And this is where all the architecture comes from. So when we think of Islamic architecture, we're really thinking Tartarian architecture, these crazy mosques and these bubbles and these Russian churches and everything, this crazy technology that they had. And at some point in the 20th century, they started taking the last of the Tartars, breaking up their families, putting them into concentration camps and gulags, and erasing as much of history as they could. In the last 300 to 400 years, they've taken people from all over the world. The Catholic Church is known for taking 20, 30,000 orphans from Russia, bringing them to Canada, 20,000 kids from Canada, bringing them to Argentina, 30,000 kids from Argentina, bringing them to New York City or Chicago, and just mixing up populations, saying that this is to support better genes, right? This is eugenics from the Catholic Church, but it's also done to make sure that the next generation, kind of like the Canadian natives, don't remember their history and aren't tied to the place that they're at. And so this also started the foundling thing where everyone's like, well, I'm an American, I'm a Canadian, I'm not really my ancestry or anything. I don't really know about that.
Huh.
Control.
And so how did you get onto this stuff? Because I guess like where I imagine there's no records or like
there's tons of records actually. So that's what's interesting is that the Russian government, the Russian Academy of Sciences, Anatoly Fomenko, Putin started putting out maps of Tartaria in 2013. Russia's schools accept Tartaria, and a lot of Brickus is already moving towards understanding that there was a Turanian or kind of Iranian Tartarian empire that crossed the world, and that the Rus have precedence in the Western Hemisphere because of their being here in the 16th century or the 12th century. This also, the reason that it was interesting to me was because when I got to South America. Because when I got to South America, I was thinking to myself, it's really interesting how so much of Spanish has Arabic words, 11,000 Arabic words, and all of this architecture down here. And we're supposed to believe it's neoclassical. And the more you look at neoclassical architecture, the more it's tied to Tartaria as well. There's these star forts, these bastion forts that look like snowflakes all over the world that are left over from their culture. It's a completely erased thing.
And they're all over the world? Like they're
all over the world. If you
out?
type in star fort or bastion fort, you'll find them in Hawaii, in Japan, in Peru, in Russia, in Italy, in Holland, in Finland, in Denmark. Everywhere you go, you'll find these Mario Brothers looking snowflake star forts. And some of them are from the 15th century, and those are the ones that they say were the originals, although a lot of them are from 6,000 years ago. So it kind of messes with the timeline idea. And then timelines are really confusing because if we're trying to say things are millions of years old, but we're using carbon dating from a society that had volcanic power, that's the other thing when we look at Tartaria, is that it probably had better technology than we realize. We think about the old world as having lesser technology, and then we talk about Graham Hancock, Atlantis, all that stuff. Tartaria is more like that. And a lot of the technology we have today, things that were invented in the 17th, 18th century, these are things that we have records of from bazaars in the Arab Ottoman Empire, that they come from Kemet, or they come from Taipang, or they come from different parts of the world 1,000 years earlier that had been somehow saved and retitled. The pentelegraph machine is one of my favorite examples.
What is the pentelegraph?
The pentelegraph machine is a fax machine from the 16th century, but it's probably much older. And what it is, it's a pen that swings, and it swings on an XYZ coordinate, and then it's sent by radio to another machine. So then it copies that signal over radio and swings another pen, and it draws a picture. So you could take a picture from the Alamo and send it over the Pacific line to Russia, and then someone in St. Petersburg could be looking at a picture that someone sent. And this is centuries ago, and this was common centuries ago in the rail world. People had railroad companies had access to technology like we have today, instantaneous communication. But you go a few centuries earlier, and the technology still exists. It's just in the hands of a few. And then where is it located? Well, so the star forts are located by volcanoes. Volcanoes tend to be located by all this ore. The Oklo volcano in Gabon has 17 natural nuclear reactors and linear accelerator like flumes that have developed. And we don't know if it's really natural, but that's the official story, because it's hard to imagine that someone in ancient Africa built a nuclear powered volcano. But we look at Krakatoa, and the same story, the idea that these volcanoes were being used for energy. And it's not that far off that we probably are using. I mean, today there are,
and we just lost
companies.
it all.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think we did. I think that there's a few groups. There's a few groups of people that still have this technology. There's a hidden hand in the pocket kind of fraternity. There's the foundlings, There's a certain group of people that were the remnants of the civilization that was conquered, that were brought into the fold, weren't allowed to have kids, and were part of the Odd Fellows kind of groups that got to run civilization for a while. And then there are these specific families, right? There's the Merovingian lines, and there's certain families. And this is kind of where it gets weird, because people will say, oh, here's a great chance to become anti-Semitic, right? Like, this is clearly about the Jews, but it's not. As you go deeper, you'll find that the Jews have been, exploited as the fall guys for a small group of people that are living all over the world, right? And so this is,
and these are what you're talking about, like the absolute, like, global elites, like the
absolute
top,
right?
Top 5 people, like the real puppet masters of everything.
It's probably families. And then this is where it gets really weird, because it gets to the David Icke level. But it's not quite reptilian, but it's the idea that, are humans all that equal in terms of our junk DNA and our genome and exome? Are there different hominids that are simultaneous? I mean, that's like a Bigfoot question. But are you the only kind of Homo sapien derivative that is alive today on the earth? And I don't think that it's such an easy question to answer without nuance. There are probably different kinds of humans that are protecting their genetic lines as well. And that is at least the ideology of the royal family. So whether it's true or not, it's the way they behave. So I think it's something to consider, that they believe that they are descendant from, who does the queen and the king say they're descendant from, right? From Solomon, from Muhammad, from Jesus Christ, from these
which queen and king?
King Charles.
Oh, he says he's descended from Muhammad.
In order to be crowned, you have to be descended from, since the Battle of Hastings, right, on the Scone Stone. And what's interesting about the crowning process is it's on the Scone Stone, the Stone of Scone, which is supposed to be Jacob's ladder. So Jacob in the Bible, he runs away because he stole his brother's blessing. And as he's running, he eventually gets so exhausted, he falls asleep on a pillow that's a stone. And he sees angels, Adonai Elohim, the sons of God, which are these elite, right? Because the giants are supposed to be the children from the Anunnaki cross, that they see them ascending and descending. So this is the stone they use to crown their elite, because they're saying, A, they're not English, right? Because in order to be a royal, you have to prove you come from outside of England. And B, they might not be human. And it's not necessarily true, but it is.
Yeah, but it's okay.
It's their faith,
okay.
Yeah.
Jesus, I don't know anything. The more you're talking to me, I'm like, shit, I don't know anything about anything. But
well, I mean, that's better, because all the stuff that we've been taught a lot, like Jesus was about 1,000 years ago, not 2,000 years ago. Jesus died in Turkey. Jesus was crucified in Istanbul. He wasn't crucified in Israel. The idea of Isis Ra Elohim being the Holy Land is a new idea. The idea that at one point Crimea was where the Hebrew people fled through the Black Sea. This is another important point to Ukraine, that the Ashkenazi Ukrainians, that they may actually be the descendants of the Egyptian flight.
All right. Yeah, so the one thing I was saying with the last name thing is, you told me that, and I told my dad, and my dad's like fairly into that stuff, and he was just like, yeah, I've never heard that. But then I went and Googled it, and you were right. And then I was like, see? And he goes, oh, I don't know.
I feel like that's the thing. Even if you're really into history, they want you to feel embarrassed about own personal history. If you have pride in your own personal history, it's kind of weird. In America, I think this is a really big thing. People don't ask what kind of family you come from, because it sounds like it's racism to ask, what the recorded historical narrative that made you is, or is part of your life, right?
Yeah, people just generally don't like it when it's a white person asking a not white person. They go, "Where are you really from, though?"
But I'd ask anybody anytime, like, it's
I don't. Yeah, I don't.
You're kind of white looking,
Yeah,
still
for sure. Of course.
But the Jesus thing to me is actually kind of interesting, because if we think that everything happened, in the desert 2,000 years ago, but you're like, wait a second, actually, this is in Istanbul 1,000 years ago. This is during the Crusades, first off. Then you're saying Jesus is during the Crusades. And the Crusades are different than you thought, because you've got to look at Cordoba and Aben Fernas and all of these different engineers and inventors. They had electricity in Spain in the 11th century, right, during the Arab time. There was street lights that were powered by hydroelectric wheels. So you've got a completely different story. You've got a world in Damascus where there are nights. There's illumination at night. Also, there's electricity, and Jesus is living at this time. And this is also connected to Russia and Crimea, because at this point, Jerusalem has moved itself essentially to Moscow. So everything that we're told, things are not happening on the parts of the world that we're told they're happening. and they're affecting us very directly.
And what's the tie-in for the Turkish elections coming up?
I think it's like May 14th. It's like
no, but what's the what? Because you're saying that it's so important.
Oh, right. So because Turkey is the center for this worldwide shift, and why this matters again is because the way we decide which lands are which states isn't about the nation. The nation's a migratory thing. A nation moves around. A nation of Islam, a nation of Israelis. The Jewish people can migrate across the desert. But a state is a resource-bound location. So if you find out that the state doesn't have the appropriate sanctions to give itself up, because what a state also is the legitimate source of violence. A state can force people to pay, at the threat of violence, taxes, which they can accumulate through state loans. So I can get a loan and I can die and not pay it off. But a state gets a loan and it's immortal. So it can force people to pay it. So it's really important in the future how you're going to force people into this world economy. And Turkey's in the center of it, because Turkey's in between the Atlanticism of America and England and their empire, and then Brickus. And so Turkey really could decide.
What's Brickus?
So Brickus is you've got the petrodollar that's emerged
like Brazil, Russia, India, China.
Right.
Like
Brickus is Brazil, Russia, and each. The idea of creating an alternative to the petrodollar, and it's built around the trade of the East. So it's the multipolarity system. Instead of having a one world government, they're trying to have a second world government. So there's two. There's a land power and a sea power. Russia wants the land. They want Eurasia. Then the Atlanticism is England. England's a boat nation, it's an island, but it controls all of this land around the world, arguably even the United States. And so really what it did to become that is by controlling ports. So the more ports it can control, the more it can control the trading empire. And this is ironically what historians say the world was like originally with Tartaria, that you had Scythians and Aryans, and you had a group of people that worked the land, and you had people that traveled, and then they would have an endless summer of trade. And this allowed for the accumulation of wealth. And anthropologists were supposed to believe that people killed each other and that this created out of war, society emerged. But Tartaria kind of disproved that, because it showed that trade was the core value that led to building the state. And this trade empire was not the same as the Roman, conscription empire.
Crazy. Okay. Hold that thought. I'm going to open the phone lines because I'm sure people have questions for you. I got questions. So the phone lines are now open, 1-888-949-2969. If you have questions for Andreas, call in and ask him. So how did you end up, this is so off topic, but how did you wind up at CNN?
Well, okay, so 2012, I think it was, that I was working for what's it called? Flipboard. And then I was working on an aggregator software. CNN bought Flipboard and they were firing everybody. And then I said meta tag, I think was the thing. And so they were like, when can you get here? And so I got to LA. I stayed at a hostel. It was like a Euro youth hostel with the pride flag. Came in the next day, like, where'd you stay? I'm like, stay at the hostel. You're crazy. I like that. And they asked me a little bit about computers, and they asked me if I could like start working right away. And I made a couple memes of like Dr. Drew and all of these celebrities at the Last Supper. They were all on drugs. And they were like, all right, yeah, you're in. And I explained to them how the internet worked a bit. And so I started doing social media strat for them. And for a long time, they even had the Swatch metric clock on their website because they trusted me. I was like, no, I'm serious. The world's going to be using metric time soon, but it never happened.
What is metric time?
Oh my God. Swatch invented this kind of watch where there's 72 beats a minute. It's not really a minute. It's kind of like a 93 seconds to a minute. There's 1,000 of them a day, 1,000 beats. And it's just one time around the world, everywhere. There's no time zones. You ask them, what time do you eat lunch here? 300 beats. What about there? 600 beats. It's amazing. Better thing. If you travel a lot, you want to use Swatch beats. Better than time zones.
Why is that better than time zones? Isn't that confusing?
I hate time zones. Going to a place and then like you have to find I don't like time zones.
You got to figure out like what's going on.
I'd like to know when people eat lunch here. If it's at 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever, that's fine. I don't need it to be. I don't need it to be the same time anywhere. It seems weird.
Okay, I'm gonna actually fire up a question from one of the patrons. This is from Jesse. He says, "What reason are we lied to about human history by our governments, assuming that you think that they are lying to us, I guess? What is the most important piece of information you think they are hiding from us?"
It's hard. So why is because control. So the less you know the less you own, right? You own yourself, you own your sovereignty, you own your world. All that's true. And you ought to have freedom. But if you trade it for a social contract, then, you'll do it. The less you know about yourself and the less you owe your past, I think that's a big part of it. What they're hiding that's most important, probably that society itself, everyone in their social contract has the ability to walk away. I think it comes down to the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta is where we get a lot of this idea for social contract, that you can sign away your rights. The king of the Magna Carta, King James, was forced at knife point, sword point, by 13 Templar, right, or Merovingian, his men, to sign a document under duress that gave up some of his rights. He was the last free man. What's a contract, by the way? A contract is where two mutually agreeing parties, not under duress, make an agreement, right? And as soon as you find out that the agreement doesn't work, it's efficiency of breach. So this is not a legal contract. It's a forced, coerced signing, right? It's not real. But that is how we have our Constitution. And we still, by accepting that and glorifying it, by saying, yeah, this is a great moment because we took away the rights of a sovereign, we forget that we're all sovereigns. And at a certain point, we all could be what we think of when we think of King Arthur or something like that, someone who has sovereignty up until they pledge allegiance to something or someone. And you don't have to do it.
Huh, okay. And so the whole Tartaria, just back on that, like, how many, like, do governments know about this, or this is just like what evidence have you found, and where did you find the evidence that kind of sent you down? So here?
One of the first persons that really brought this evidence to the world was Anatoly Fomenko. Anatoly Fomenko is a Russian scientist, mathematician, professor who worked for the Soviet government and doing chronology work and trying to figure out what was wrong with the calendar. And so he was one of the ones who figured out, okay, well, here are 12 kings, birthday to death day, that are the same as these 12 other kings, but it's happening 500 years later or different. And this is something the Catholic Church did in order to assimilate Bulgaria or something like that. And a big part of this is because the Janissaries were moving across from Croatia to Bulgaria to the Black Sea. This was the North Ottoman Empire. And so this is the area where all these people were conscripted and soldiered. The Mafit became the mafia, right? Like the mafia get their name from this group as well. So I forget what your first part of that question was, though, right? Who I heard it from. So after Anatoly Fomenko started getting out there and more people started hearing about Tartaria in general, there was more and more research that was put into this by the German government, Harvard, Yale. I think Yale has the Tartar Codex, which was from when did they find it? 1920 or something like that. In the 1970s, they locked it up. I got to see it. It's an old manuscript that talks about Tartary. The Cotton Codex talks about Tartary. That's in Yale, at the Yale University.
They have it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you actually got to physically like hold it, or
we need to hold it. It's huge. It's rolled out on a table. I get to use gloves and I got to like look at the thing.
And is it like a Cyrillic language?
No, it's glagolitic. So that's the other thing, is the glagolitic script was created by Cyril, and Pope Gregory was also a part of the creation of the glagolitic alphabet. But they destroyed all the old alphabets in order to create the new scripts. So they used Greco-Roman, which are both based on Etruscan. And Etruscan is essentially mirror backwards, which is why Pig Latin is a joke about Dog Latin, which is inverse Latin, which is Etruscan. And which is why so many people thought that, this is a satanic movement. There's all these groups of people that were against the Catholic Church that were praying backwards. But it's because they were praying forwards, and the Catholic Church had inverted everything by reading script that was designed to be printed. And so you mirror the script when you printing press letters. So they have the opposite and create this inversion of the entire culture, which could be satanic, but it also might just be ineptitude by the people who took over.
Damn, wild. Sorry, I missed, someone called, but then I missed it because you were going on your rant. Okay, so I'm trying to digest this all. So like, is like where, like, what are the craziest discoveries, I guess, of besides like manuscripts? Like what kind of other stuff are we talking about here? Like what was what was the size of the civilization?
So over 1 billion people, probably about 2 billion.
A billion?
Yeah, because it's the entire world. It's essentially so Delano. If you think about Theodore Roosevelt, like he went to the Philippines and created the mock Battle of Manila, where they staged defeating the Portuguese, paid the Portuguese to look like they were dying as they shot blanks at them to take the Philippines because of the Star Fort in Manila, right? And so
This
all
was
of these
when? When was this?
1890s or 1915, I forget. Whatever, the Manila mock Battle of Manila. But this is after, because if you look at the Philippines, they'd already been conquered by the Portuguese, and the Portuguese did this in the 16th century because they were already under the Sephardic Moorish trade alliance in the 12th century so the Portuguese swallowed up the trade network that the Moors had, and so that's another thing. But the
actually,
Moors,
you know what? Hold, sorry, Andres, hold that. We got a call here. Let's take a call. 1 second, please. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, what's up? Hold 1 second while I patch you through, and you are on with Andreas. Excertus.
Hello, Andreas. How are you?
How's it going?
Mikey G from upstate New York.
Oh, you're a little hard to hear there, Mike.
Hey, so, all right, it's just stupid headphones. All right, F it.
Yeah.
Talk to you guys later.
No, don't give up.
No,
I want to
no.
hear this.
Oh man, I was just hoping that he would just adjust them. Generally, when I say you're hard to hear, people will be like, "Yeah, I'll just take my headphones out."
Yeah, you don't have to fall on the sword right away. Like
no. Usually, it's just that's like just be like, "Hey, can you just adjust this in some way?" Because I don't know, a lot of people use AirPods and stuff, and they actually have terrible quality. So. Anyways, where were we?
While you're trying to get him, let me just say, like, so geological reset's really interesting. Looking at Africa, we think things like millions of years ago, it's acceptable to think it was green. It wasn't millions of years ago. It was within 1,000 years, probably like 600 to 800 years ago. Most of Africa was fully green. You've got water in the Mega Chad, right? The Mega Chad is a great one. Songhai Empire had Jenne.
Okay, sorry, we got sorry to cut you off. We got some calls here. Now they're pouring in. All right, let's try this one here. 1 moment, please. Hello, 1 second. Who am I speaking with?
Calvin.
Hey, what's up?
Calvin.
Oh, what the?
Hey,
all right. You are on the air.
I was wondering if the Tartarians have ever predicted anything found to be real.
The Tartarians ever predicted something? Say that again.
Like in the text.
Oh, you mean like if they had prophecies that turned out to come true?
Or prophecies that have to be found, or prophecies that have been true. Yeah.
The prophecies that have come true, you're saying?
So for one,
both.
So one thing I would say is if you look at Tartaria as the world of cultures instead of as an empire, a lot of these native cultures talks a lot about the Black Sun event of 1812. And so they said there was going to be a point of turmoil, that there was going to be earthquakes, like there's going to be volcanic eruptions, things that were breaking down, kind of a prediction of like a fall of society that comes. And then also native tribes, the Arak Confederacy talked about the Black Sun and that there would be this raining down of fire, right? And so what happened is in 1811, for 260 days, we experienced Napoleon Comet, which was just every night fire in the sky. And people were confused. There was a point where earthquakes were causing the Mississippi River to run the other direction. And while this happened, people thought, hey, the old country myths were that when this came, it would be the end of the world, right? And so they started putting people into insane asylums who believed that Napoleon's comet had to do with the apocalypse or with some major transition in time. You can look up Napoleon Comet Syndrome, and they would arrest people and abduct them.
Napoleon Comet Syndrome? Man,
yeah,
we got a fire after show, by the way, because I'm writing all this stuff down.
Based. Yeah, so they would go ahead. Sorry.
Well, what about for like from 2023 for like tomorrow or something?
So not necessarily. What you do have, Morals and Dogma talks about the Tartars 11 times and talks about how they had their civilization stolen from them because they didn't deserve it and they didn't work it. And so the Freemasons have a lot of things that talk about 2012 to 2076. 2076 is the major next generational goal of the Scottish Rite. And it's directly tied to Tartaria because they believe that America was the Russo-Tartarian state. And there's two flags of Tartaria. There's the owl and there's the phoenix. And there's actually also the griffin flag. And so representing that there were...
Right, I can read or look. I can read up on it or something. Okay, well, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't answer your question correctly. I tried.
Yeah, so but basically what he was asking is like, were there any texts that had prophecies from the Tartarians, essentially?
So I mean, there's definitely. So what's weird, I guess, just on that level, there of course are, and there's a lot of texts from Tartars. It's a lot more than you'd think there would be, particularly in Eastern Europe. But even the Quran is essentially the Uthman Quran. The first Quran that we have is a Tartar Quran, and it was found in Tartarstan. So, I mean, the more you start to look at the Judeo-Christianity link in Islam and Abraham, all of it, even the idea that Osarsif in the Bible, that the Egyptian diaspora of the Jewish people was to erase the culture because they're for 40 years in the desert, so they can't remember what happened before it. And Josephus is then pushing this new chronology, this new history. So everything, even to that point, there's a point when we all have this kind of shared culture and it believes in personal best, but the argument between do what is right if you believe it is right and don't do what is wrong if you believe it is wrong versus do what thou wilt, because do what thou wilt to be the most powerful you can be was another kind of society that existed simultaneously, and that ended up destroying it. And
so have archaeologists have they found?
Right. So the oldest thing we have is in the world. Besides the Glasnitsa, actually older than the Glasnitsa tablets in Bulgaria are the Tartar tablets, right? So if you look up the Tartarian tablet, you can see this Pokemon-looking coin that's drawn thousands of years ago. And they've been debating what it's about, but we're pretty convinced it's a futures trading coin. So it's a ceramic or a clay coin that draws on one side animals and on the other side trees. And the idea is that it's guesstimating the futures of this field of fruit that will come from looking at this one tree. I can assume there'll be this many trees in the field. That length of arm means it'll be that big of a field. This many fruit on the tree means that many fruit on the other trees. I'm going to guesstimate that for how many calves I'm going to get. Looking at this one calf, how many calves were in the litter.
For trade or whatever?
For trade, right, and not for war. And that's a big
so
difference.
There's no dispute that Tartaria was like a place, it's just what it was?
Correct. Yeah, there's no dispute that Tartaria exists.
Like everybody agrees, point. Like any like archaeologist, whatever, they're like, yes, that was a place, but it's what it was.
Right.
Is
even into the 20th century, even to 21st century, there's Tartarstan exists as a state now today in the Russian Federation. So, and there's still architecture there. So it's impossible to argue that. And also this, in terms of linguistic connections and memetics, there's all of these, the argument gets strange when people start to talk about Antiquitech, because when they talk about antique technology that was better, or at least as good as some of the things we have now, or even the 19th century, it's really hard for people. And it's weird because this is almost on the 1619 project level to say, hey, you didn't have to be a white European to know how to work with electricity or fire. But really, you look at the Arab world, they had the camera obscura, they had all of this amazing technology. Radio was being developed and even considered in different ways through crystal work in Spain and Cordoba. These things existed. So it's really confusing when people say, okay, I'm looking at New York City and I think New York City is Tartaria. No. Not just that New Amsterdam was Tartaria, but that these buildings in Brooklyn are the remnants of buildings from these people. Because we're told that the Native Americans just had teepees. And it's really hard to imagine what if they had bricks. But of course they did. I mean, and we know that. We look all over South America and we look at the Anastasi, we look at natives have bricks. This is not out of the question. But if Victorian buildings were built by another culture than the British, than the Victorians, that's where people start to freak out. They're like, is it possible that all of Canada, that some of these, like, what if Montreal was built by the Tartarians?
All right, hold that thought. We got a call here. 1 second, please. Hello. Hey, what's up? Can you just turn down your thing in the back?
I should just turned it down.
All right, you are on with Andreas. Who am I speaking with? Hello?
Awesome. So I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So back in 1896, Shreveport, Louisiana, came out with a newspaper showing the Tartarian alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if many people realize that. That's something else to look into. And a question for him would be, I know that a lot of places have Tartaria, like but right by Russia or right in Russia. So I guess, what do you think wiped out Tartaria? Do you think it was the Russians, or do you think it was like the mud floods people speculate about?
Yeah, so let me start with Shreveport. So it's interesting you bring up Shreveport, and the more you look at America, the more important it is that they didn't just have TPs. That, for instance, the Confederacy had airships and submarines because of Tartarian technology. And when you look at the Russian-American company, you'll start to see Russian bases in Santa Cruz and California and in Oregon, all along the West Coast. So it's pretty clear that there was a lot more interaction, even if people are pushed out later, which, of course, when there's a war, people are pushed out. And can people live in a place and die? Look at Paraguay. 98%, 99% of the population of Paraguay was wiped out in the Triple Alliance War. A completely new population exists. So it's very easy for us to forget what existed before. Now, where was Tartaria? The Crimean state of the Khazars extended and took over the Cordoba Caliphate. So when we think of Khazarians, and I know there's a conspiracy there, but the Khazarians were a horde.
I get called that on the internet sometimes.
And you're an adorable Khazarian at that. But the Cordoba Caliphate, which was an Arabic state, was controlled eventually by the Khazarians, right? And so the Khazarians also had control over the Mughal Empire in a lot of ways. And there was trade with the Rus across the Bering Strait. So again, how big is Tartaria? It's everywhere. And did it end in Russia? No. I mean, kind of. But what it is the last holdouts that we see are in Tatarstan. But it was in Manila. It was in Formosa. It was in Taiwan, Formosa. Taiwan was called Formosa at the time. It was in all parts of Polynesia and Indonesia. It was Zealand, right? When we talk about Atlantis and these land masses that are lost in the South Pacific, all these islands that are now military islands for the Bikini Atoll, Project Fishbowl, nuclear dangerous places that you're not allowed to go to, run by the U.S. Navy. These are major epicenters for some of the energy and trade network that existed for the Tartarian Empire. The way I think it ended might not have been just one volcano, but Krakatoa is a major player in this story because it's an energy power plant in former Solent, which is now where New Zealand gets its name from Solent. And this volcanic eruption, the story goes, mainstream story is that around the world in England and Canada, they heard the explosion 6 times bouncing off itself. The sound waves bounced into each other and off itself. And that elephants were carried by tsunamis to islands. And that yet still a Dutch East Indies trading company representative survived in a lighthouse and saw the whole thing. So, I mean, the story is pretty messed up, but the more you look at that, and then you look at The Year Without a Summer, where there was a volcanic eruption in Campi Flegrei in Italy. And then there's the Finnish volcano. So we have these huge environmental shifts that happened in the last 400 years, 500 years. And so between the 14th and 16th century, major amounts of the technology is disrupted. And you have to imagine, what would America be like without technology? I mean, when the Roman story goes that the aqueducts were cut, and without water, people in the city couldn't survive. They were living off feces. I mean, imagine what we would do if they cut the Wi-Fi aqueducts off, right? If we didn't have access to communication and everything. And I think that it wouldn't take very much for a highly advanced civilized society to collapse, especially without electricity, without its technology. 1 generation, 2 generations later, people would believe the whole thing was a fantasy. And then after that, they would think, okay, this is a folk tale, because they're talking about a place that had lights at night and people were well. It sounds like heaven. It's hard to it's abstract at a certain point. And then it's Tarnation, right? What happened in Tarnation?
I don't know. What is Tarnation? I've heard Tarnation is
Tarnation?
Like yeah,
Tarnation,
like I've never heard it as a place.
So Tartaria is kind of turned into a racist thing. I mean, people, the Tartarus was the name of hell. Hades was called Tartarus, right? And people think about the tartar, cream of tartar is potash, which is used in weaponry, right? So a lot of the things we associate with even Tar Baby, right? And the Tartars were associated with blacks for a long time. They thought the Moorish people were all Tartars. More interesting that you have a group of people that think that the whites were and the blacks were and the Asians were. You kind of Genghis Khan, red hair, green eyes. The story that everyone was a fusion of these different people that are interacting with each other, and then they're further pushed apart. It's really the opposite of the narrative we're told.
Huh. All right. Well, we love the caller. We lost them. But so if you had any other questions, I do apologize. Let's go to another question from one of the patrons over here. This is from Jack. He says, "I don't get the Tartaria conspiracy. If there was some beautiful world that came recently before us, why don't our ancestors talk about it?" I guess you kind of answered this a bit, but it's not possible that none of our ancestors lived through the supposed destruction of our civilization.
Right. No. So the ancestors did. And that's what's really interesting. A lot of people died. A lot of people are orphans. When you start to look into it, if you don't know your background, chances are at some point your family had orphanage in the story. They were taken from their mother, put into a church, maybe shuttled to another part of the world. That's a huge thing. It's a huge part of a lot of people's story.
Yeah, I feel it's very rare for record keeping to go much before like the 1800s too. Okay, we got another caller.
If your great grandfather was a post worker, see, I asked.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Okay, one more second, please. Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Oh, you sound much better, my man. Okay, 1 second while we patch you through, and you are on with Excertus. What is?
Hello. How are you, sir?
How's it going, buddy?
All right. So, what other than the star forts would be the evidence in like North America for the Tartary?
So it gets pretty interesting when you think about how. Okay, if you are interested in the mud flood theory and you look at the architecture of neoclassical architecture, then Tartaria could stand to be part of a lot of it. It could be that all of Chicago, all of Indianapolis, a lot of these major cities that were built in the 19th century, supposedly, where we don't have architectural records of the buildings of a lot of these buildings. We have some of it. Don't get me wrong. And there's also reassembly, like in Utah, where the Mormons have reassembled buildings. But there's these huge tunnel systems. Kansas City is a great example. Kansas City, there was a war there, and they've divided it in half, which is why half of it's in Missouri and half of it's in Kansas. It's where the fiber optic internet is. It's where vanadium mines are. It's why the theosophist Frank Baum mentions it so much in Wizard of Oz, Oz being Hebrew for strength, right? So there's a lot of parts of the United States also where the Mormons have played. They say, okay, well, look what's going on in Missouri, on the coast of Missouri, which is again with the story of this former war that happened, or what maybe Babel happened in.
Are you talking about like what they talk about in the Book of Mormon thing?
Yeah, so what's
that
interesting?
War, or
the Mormon story is a lot more. The Mormon story is a lot more correct than you'd believe. There's some things the Mormons say that are true. Let's put it that way. And when you start to look at the oceanographic path, the natural progression is to go from Africa, Bering Strait into Florida, and it comes down around and comes back up. So you go through the Caribbean. So it's a natural path that you would go to. When you look at the Cretaceous maps, and this is a big way scientists play this off, is they say this all happened, but it happened millions of years ago. Calm down. But so if the Cretaceous period allowed for the Pacific, the Western Sea interior, then Missouri would have been right on the coast and been perfect plausibility for Eden. And this would have made it possible for them to leave during a giant flood, go to Africa, and then eventually leave during another environmental shift and come back, which is what the story of the Levites are. And, you could say what you want about Joseph Smith, but he did get a lot of his stuff from tomb robbers in Egypt. For instance, the Joseph Codex, the Gospel of Joseph, the Gospel of Abraham, right, that he had translated. These are real Egyptian texts that came out of tombs, and so these were the mummies of. And
Joseph Smith had them.
Yeah, so he actually paid to have mummies brought, who were supposedly Yuya, which was Joseph. So Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, a couple hundred years before Moses, shows up in Egypt. long story short, takes over the country by creating a drought, and then by droughting the Nile, forcing people in the drought to pay, and they don't have any money. So he says, okay, well, if you want grain, let me have your cattle. Well, we need our cattle. Well, you can have them, but just pay me what you make from the cattle, like a tax. Okay, next year, come back. Oh, we need more grain again. Well, give me your land. Well, we can't give you our land. Well, you can just pay a tax on land. So all of a sudden, the Pharaoh owns the cattle and the land, and everyone's working for them. And then that was Yuya's job, and that's how he took over Egypt. After that, you've got Moses. Moses is Ramses, right? So he's Ra, son of Ra, and he takes over. And you have to remember, he's not able to speak Hebrew. He's raised by the Egyptians, and yet he becomes in charge of the Hebrew people, right? So that's an interesting one in and of itself. But he's a priest. He's an Asarsif priest. So he's a Setian priest. And then he introduces Atanism. Atanism is the religion of the sun god, right? So it's the son of God. It's the one God, henotheism, and then leaves Egypt. And this is Akhenaten. Akhenaten is Moses. So there's 3 levels of this story. And we're supposed to say, okay, is this Egyptian? Is this Greek? Is this Roman? Is this Hebrew? But really, this is what happened in Tartaria. And then we have the Josephus version, we have the Egyptian version, and this is what's left of the story. But we're all the direct descendants of it.
Jeez.
I also
and it's not
heard
that long
about something about that.
Sorry.
They found some woman back in the day found cocaine in mummies in Egypt, and she tested them several times, cocaine and nicotine, and it kind of just shows there was more of a travel back and forth than people would like to say.
Right. There's absolutely, it's really interesting. You look at the Peruvian coast because you also have the redhead giants. And so that's another thing. We talked about Genghis Khan earlier, or Georgi. Right. So a lot of these people that are descendant from the Homo capensis, perhaps, allegedly, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about that, but there could there's the idea there's multiple hominids that are simultaneously existing today and they're interacting and interbreeding. So the idea that a Neanderthal and a Homo sapien can breed, or the Denisovan and a Neanderthal, or the Denisovan and a Furiensis, Homo Furiensis, that these different kinds of humans could all interbreed with each other is an amazing fact of nature. That's the truth that we know this already. It's called gene flow. And a horse and a donkey can't do that, right? You get a mule that is infertile. I mean, that's the closest you get for a lot of species. So we are a lot closer, and our promoter sequences are a lot closer, meaning we have exodrivers in our promoter sequences, which allow for the genes to transfer if they hybridize, because they're in the same places. So there's something very different about each kind of human, yet they're all similar hominids. And there are likely hominids that are, the Homo capensis are the ones that they have elongated skulls. And different groups around the world who lived under the Homo capensis would elongate their skulls later in order to emulate them. They want their rulers to look like the elongated skull people. And this has happened in Peru. This has happened in Georgia. Yeah, sorry.
Right. That's what I was just going to ask you. Didn't they find some of those in like the Caucasus Mountains and in China or something?
They found them in China. So Teilhard de Chardin, the greatest philosopher, who the Exorcist priest in the movie The Exorcist is based on, Teilhard de Chardin discovered the Peking man. And so they had sent him to Africa, trying to get him to be silent. Then he started talking about metaphysics and evolution as worship and stardust. And they're like, whoa. So they sent him to China. And then in China, he discovered the Peking man, which proved that there was simultaneous evolution, that there were different kinds of humans that existed at the same time, which was not what the Catholic Church really wanted to hear at that moment. But then Julian Huxley put his work out there. But it's not just there. Because you can go to Florida, you can go to California. So the Smithsonian Museum hid tons of giants. If you look up Smithsonian Museum, you'll find 10-foot tall giants across America. There are books of Jesuits interacting in Florida with 10-foot, 15-foot tall people. You can watch Dr. Longo talk about Florida. In Florida, they've discovered giant stone anchors larger than houses from the giant boats that existed in the 1,000 years prior, or 11,000 years ago. But I don't believe it's really that long ago. Yeah, I mean, Florida's got giants. And then there was the Giants Museum in California, which they had to demolish because they said these were native people. But they had 9-foot, 11-foot tall giants in that museum as well.
Wow.
There's
are there still
walls in Montana, too.
Right, Montana giants, and then, of course, Paul Bunyan. So when you start looking into Arcadia and what was Minnesota and the giants of Canada, there's huge giants everywhere. But the thing is, the Smithsonian said, and this is really interesting because I remember looking into this, that, well, we can't just display natives' bones. And that was how they politically corrected the situation. And it used to be like such a big conspiracy. Like, why did they hide the bones? Well, now they have a perfectly good excuse. And when you look into Smithsonian and you find about Smithson and how he was a good guy that had a great library and they murdered him probably and took all of his money and invested it in America when he was a British guy who died in Italy, the whole thing is amazing. They basically run the National Archives, right?
Yeah, that's wild. So they won't. They have these.
They just repatriate them.
Right.
Yeah, but they won't display them. So if they find any of these like gigantic.
Yeah, and it's like you gotta imagine what that means also for the royal family, because you've got really tall people like Plantagenet. So everyone who's a king, everyone who's a president had to sign. Anyone who's ever been a president is descendant from King Plantagenet, who signed the Magna Carta, right? And so that's a big
president of the United States.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
All descends from this one person?
From King Plantagenet. And you can get a map of it. There's a girl from Santa Cruz who made a map for her.
So then theoretically, every president of the United States is related?
Well, I mean, theoretically, we're all related. Right,
I guess.
brother?
But I'm saying, but when was that? You're saying this was from the Magna Carta?
Right. Correct. And it's actually usually you can tell who's going to be president by who is closer related to King Plantagenet.
Crap. Damn. How'd they figure this out? How do they have his like?
Well, it's interesting to me because people, while they're not keeping track of their genes, I mean, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, which was owned by the Mormon Church originally, a lot of these groups are keeping records of your DNA for you. And don't worry, they're keeping records of their own because it matters to them, right? Religiously. Yeah.
Crazy. All right, thanks, caller.
All right, thanks, man. Take it easy, guys.
Yeah, peace.
All right, we got another call here. Let me get this. Hello. Hey, what's up? Just 1 second while we patch you through, and you are on with Excertus. Who am I speaking with?
Awesome. This is the same dude as before, asking about Tartaria.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I got a question about Atlantis. A lot of people speculate Atlantis was also a one-world empire. Do you think that somehow Tartaria and Atlantis are connected or fought at some point? Any evidence for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Atlantis was one of the city-states of Tartaria. So Tartaria, and they point out in Mauritania, there's the 23-kilometer ring. There's another one in Spain. There's another one in Argentina. There's one in New Zealand. There's a few in the ocean. There's one by Yonaguni in Japan that are almost identical. And so the thought is it one Atlantis? It's another Atlantis. This has been pushed before, that there's been a lot of city-states that were fully autonomous, that were volcanic powered or some sort of natural power that were connected into this network, that were part of this trade system. And when we heard about Atlantis, we're hearing about the fall of one of the autonomous sovereign city-states, city islands that existed. And that's the future of every place. England's going to look like Atlantis, the way Herodotus articulated it. But all of Tartaria had the technology. So the idea that it was just one place and the rest of the world was just barren, that's not the past. That's the future. That's what they want to do. They want to have one city, one giant tower. Arthur C. Clarke talked about maybe having 7 super towers, which we all live inside of. And then the rest of the world's dodo birds and mastodons, right? Because then it'll environmentally clean itself up. Because allow nature to take its course, and we remove ourselves from the equation. We're moving towards that. That is Atlantis. But the real Atlantis was just one of the city-states of Tartaria.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and sorry, I should say also, you can get evidence for that if you look into Herodotus, because he talks about Tartaria. And when you read the Cotton Codex, they talk about Tartaria as after the fall of Atlantis, there continued to be Tartaria, and that Tartaria was of Atlantis. But they don't call it Atlantis. Atlantis is like a 19th century kind of terminology. And Atlantis became popular because in the 16th century, in the 12th to 16th century, people talking about it in the Cotton Codex and Beowulf, right? They talk about Nova Atlantis by the time of Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon said America would be Nova Atlantis, right? So there's a push there also.
I mean, there must be some. Thanks, caller. Do you have anything else?
No,
right,
I appreciate it.
Oh, awesome. That was, by the way, for people who are trying to get through, Just keep trying because I don't have a way to put people on hold, unfortunately. So you just got to keep trying, and we'll get you through. All right, we got another caller. I was going to say something, but it don't matter. Hello, caller.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. What's up? 1 second while we patch you through, and you're on with.
Am I coming in clear?
Yeah, sound great, and you're on with Excertus.
Perfect. So I came in a little late, so I don't know if he's answered these questions or anything, but I just have a quick one. So for the age of this race, or the civilization, sorry, what, because you said it's sooner, closer than you would think, but like, what is closer? Like, let's just say our 2023, how many years backwards would you say? Like, just
to when it fell, or when it began, or when it was in its prime?
I'll like a little bit of both. So I'll ask when it fell, and then I'll ask when it began.
So
I was kind of more asking when it began. So I'm interested in both. So sorry. Continue.
So it fell by 1666, and so you've got like the Fire of London, you've got the re-engineering of most of the names of it, and about 150 years later, you've got the erasure of it. So by the 1811, you've got World War Zero, and so Napoleon.
All right.
Everything.
I want to reel you back in.
Yeah.
And when did this start?
So going back maybe 2,000 years, it's arguable, because things gradually happen, but it would have been in its prime 1,000 years ago for sure, and probably existed before that.
So 1,000 years ago. So you're saying 2,000 years ago to 1,000. Like, so let's say it started 2,000 years ago, prime 1,000 years ago, and then putted out in the 1600s. So that's quite a long time. Okay.
Right.
So
right.
I'm keeping focus. So they had colonies in North America and everything. So what do you mean they had like colonies? Like, are you talking like colonies where they had like people like building stuff? Or are you talking like colonies like just like a quick like taking resources and like building things, or like just like taking and like living there, like just for population growth? Both.
So you've got trade, you've got an endless summer of trade, you've got certain parts of the family that live there indefinitely, you've got other parts of the family that are traveling indefinitely.
Like, was this during their like heyday where they started forming these things, or was this like during the beginning or near the end?
I can't be sure that this is the only civilization. According to the Mayans and according to a lot of people, the idea that there's been several resets before this one.
Because like Mayans would be older than what we were talking about.
Right, but the idea that there could be 6,000 or 11,000 year old civilization, that's not implausible. But the idea that's that long ago, I don't think it's necessary.
Krakatoa, sorry. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, but Krakatoa, you were saying, was used as like a space factory, I believe.
As a energy plant, and also for resources, for natural resources, iron and metals.
100%. So do you think Krakatoa Jr., like the other volcano, is also being used for that in secret, or like is that like kind of because of
I think so. You can look up tons of volcanoes. Tons of volcanoes are being used by submarine volcanoes. Underwater volcanoes are used all the time. Glenn Maxwell, Terra Mars project, was all about using volcanoes for energy.
So do you think that they shifted more into that, where they're able to like take advantage of more of the underwater volcanoes than the upper volcanoes? Because let's be serious here, if you're taking free energy, it's a little bit harder nowadays to hide it on land versus underwater.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not hard to hide. I think what we think of as volcanoes is also confusing, because like the flumes of volcanoes are not necessarily these piles, like the sediment piles that we see at the top that we're calling a volcano. There's also underground, subterranean, and submarine volcanoes are really a diverse idea. There's water volcanoes, steam volcanoes, mud volcanoes. They're releasing just dirt and mud, islands that are being produced in the sea by volcanoes. So there's volcanoes in general.
You're getting into the weeds for me, man. I thought we were talking like magma cores and stuff.
There's all kinds of stuff
that like eventually erupts. Yeah, no, you're saying like I know like three of what you just said. So like
even a solar flare, for instance, might have been from a volcano.
Taking energy and everything. I understand.
Right.
I understand.
Yeah. But I mean, I think the other
so-
thing is a giant impact, like from a volcano, would wipe out the city around it, which is also why there'd be certain. Today, it makes sense to have them isolated. They're in places that are far from people.
Well, yeah, 100%. But then again, it's the reason why was it Mount Vesuvius? You can find like hundreds of dead bodies from like hundreds of years because the land's fertile and it's worth, risking your life to grow some crops.
Sure. Bananas and wine, the best wine. Go hunting for volcanoes if you want to find good soil.
Yeah.
Sorry. Unfortunately, a riveting conversation, but I've lost track of my last thing, so I'm going to let you go.
It's all good. Thanks, caller. Appreciate you, man. Yeah.
I'm going to harass Danny for a second.
Yeah, man.
We're almost at 200 likes, and
sorry, I haven't been tracking it. I'm gonna give away another. Couple. Once we hit 200, I'll give 2 more away. Thank you for reminding me. I'm operating a lot of things here.
It's a conspiracy.
All right, thanks, dude. All right, we got some more callers here. Oh, they're coming in hot. All right, here we go. Hello.
Hey, I don't know too much about Tarnation or anything.
Hold on. Hey, just one. Hey, sorry, just 1 second. We're just okay. You are on with Andreas. Hey, what's up?
Hey, I was saying I don't know too much about Tarnation or anything, but I do have 2 serious side questions I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
First question is, why doesn't Ryan Long have any eyebrows? And second question is, who would win in a fight between you and him?
It'd be a good fight. It would be a tough one to say, and he has eyebrows. He's blonde.
Ryan would totally hit you in the nuts, though.
Nah, he doesn't.
He would cheat.
No. Well, he's got leverage on me. He's taller than me, so. But I got a lot of weight on him. So
you have probably weight.
Yeah, I got some pounds on him.
Wait. Ryan went to Guelph, but you went to Guelph too, right? So that's
we both went to Guelph.
Yeah, so that's legal. Yeah.
Correct.
If you
all right,
bet your life on it, who do you think would win?
I mean, if I'm having to bet, obviously I'm gonna bet on myself.
Wait, is it to the death?
Well, who has the?
Yeah, is it to the death?
I guess, yeah. If you had to guess, I mean, if you had to,
I mean, I got to bet on myself. I mean, why would you bet against yourself to the death?
If it was a fair fight, if it's a fair fight, Danny. If it's a to the death fight with no rules, then Ryan.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Carl.
Well, then last question.
Oh, whoops! I cut him off. Yes, Guelph, Ontario. Someone says in the chat. 10 more likes, and I'll give away another channel membership. And the phone lines are open.
Shout out to Guelph. Guelph is clearly Tartarian.
Yeah. Have you ever been there before? I know we talked about it, right?
I got a lot of friends who went to Guelph for whatever reason. I know.
Right. We talked about that.
Grassy,
Yeah. Okay. This caller has been trying to get through forever, so I'm glad that. No, he's through. Hello, caller. 1 second, please. Trevor from Dayton. 1 second, please, while we patch you through to Andreas. All right, Trevor from Dayton, you are on with Andreas. What's up?
My question is, what's up with Australia, man? Those convicts couldn't have built that stuff. Could that stuff be from Tartary too?
Thank God you brought that up. Yeah, so I got a lot of friends who do Australian Tartary videos because it is its own thing and it's incredible.
Was Australia like one of the colonies or what?
So it's really again interesting when you talk about hominids and the idea of the Aborigine, because like they are their own human essentially, to like a very real human. There's the idea of the mystical order, what existed in Aboriginal world before Dreamtime. That Dreamtime's all that's left after the major reset. They went underground. There's huge underground civilization. Everyone's got this story. The Quechua in South America, the across Native American tribes in America, but also in Africa and in Australia, they went underground during this 100-year apocalyptic environmental shift, right? And so when they came back out, you've got a natural people that's left, but it's not that they didn't invent or live in these buildings. And so you look at Perth, you look at Adelaide. Oh my God, right? Is that right? Adelaide in Australia is just this crazy bunch of buildings that were. So then they bring in orphans, foundlings, tell them that they're refurbishing these buildings, tell them they built the buildings in less than a year and moved them in. And the other crazy thing is all of Australia today is the headquarters for a huge Freemasonic reset for 2076. So they're in the process of building more neoclassical architecture and preparing for whatever environmental shift that happens. And if you look at the old maps, at one point, Australia connected to Antarctica. I mean, we're talking maps from the 16th century when they say they didn't visit South America or Antarctica until the 18th century. So the connections between Argentina and Australia, probably a land bridge, which is crazy.
What's the 2076 significance?
So the Freemasons have this generational plan kind of goal. And if you read Albert Pike, he wrote Morals and Dogma, he talks about the Tartars, he talks about the Scythians, talks about these different tribes in the world. But they talk about how, you put yourself towards an incremental step, Fabian steps, degrees. And in your lifetime, you can get so many degrees done. But in 5 lifetimes, you get more. And so a lot of the time, what people used to do is they would pledge not just their life or 5 years of their life, but 5 generations of their sons to a military, right? To the Janissaries, you'd pledge your kids generation after generation. And that's essentially what happened. The Masons have plans that go from, 1911 until 2012, or 1918 until 2012, 1917 until 2012, and then 2012 until 2076. And they, this is the next transition. And 2012 was very different than the world in 1911, right? And things that happened from around the Titanic, right before the Titanic and the Federal Reserve. And things will be very different in 2076 from the way things are in 2012. And that will take a generation.
Okay. And that's going to be some sort
do the
of
Masons know about Tartaria?
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, read Morals and Dogma, the Freemasonic 33-degree book that Albert Pike wrote, that is the definition of Scotch Rite Freemasonry. It tells you about every degree. And it talks about the Tartars 11 times in that book, which is it's required reading to become Scotch Rite.
I mean, that's awesome. Thanks for taking my call, guys. Yeet.
Oh, for sure.
Take
care.
Yeet. Appreciate it. Thanks for calling in. Yeah, he called whoever that was. Yeah, he called like literally 100 times. But the way this whole Zoom thing's this whole Zoom thing set up, it's kind of hard to manage. But okay. Again, man, I got so many things that I got on the list for the after show here. I don't even know. It's so funny because like there's so many. Like you said, the Smithsonian, and then you're like Smithson. I'm like, I thought it was a dude named Smithsonian.
And he was chill.
Like I legit didn't even.
He's not even the bad guy. Like they took his thing. Like he had a library, he had all these cool books. He had a club of people that were trying to collect books. Because that's how libraries started. They're like, let's try. You have to imagine being a Freemason wasn't so bad. Was
he a Freemason?
He's definitely something. I don't know if he's a Freemason exactly. He was definitely members of all kinds of clubs, all kinds of secret clubs.
Club.
But if you're a part of a secret club, that meant that you had access to books, right? Because there's no internet. So that's kind of like being in a subscription plan to reality.
Yeah.
And you get to read.
Right. Okay. Let's take some more calls here. Hello, caller. 1 second, please, while we patch you through. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, what's up? You are on with Andreas.
Hello. I was just curious if Andreas there could comment a little bit more about the concept that some of the older buildings found in places like he mentioned, Montreal or Chicago or Detroit, actually predate the current construction period that they're normally attributed to.
So
I'll take my response off the air. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. That's cool. That is exactly where it gets the craziest, because people are like, okay, I can handle this and I can handle Tartaria now. It's fine. Yeah, the Jesuits, the Catholic Church lied. Okay. But when you get into manifest destiny, because so many people believe, well, we went to America and they couldn't even invent the wheel. You know what I mean? Never mind that the Mayan calendar is a wheel. They couldn't invent the wheel. Like there's a lot of these inconsistencies with our Eurocentric narrative. Another reason why the 1619 Project isn't really wrong to exist, because it's true. The official narrative is crap. It's not what really happened in history. But it's just so hard for people. The idea that there were people living in America that interacted with Russians, and that the Russians were interacting with the Native American. The Scythians were building buildings, that they weren't just building teepees, but that you have essentially the same kind of buildings that you had in Russia, like these churches and things, and stonework. And when you go across what the Mormons were doing in Deseret, trying to rebuild these things, especially after the Civil War. Because when the Civil War hit, so much of the mission was to destroy these leftover states from Tartaria that were in the Confederacy, parts of the South that were just wiped off the map by Sherman, because they knew, like, they had access to this technology. If you look at Galveston, Texas, if you look at some of these places where they had electricity, had hydroelectric powered street cars and trolleys in the 19th century, right, and street lights and everything. It was ahead of what we have now. You can't find a lot of that stuff in Texas now. So things were so advanced, and they just had to systematically destroy all of it. But when you go look at the the post offices, the water and power buildings, they have these crazy gods and statues. And you've seen, sounds like the World's Fair expedition, which is amazing. We didn't even bring up the World's Fair expedition, but the World's Fair expedition, a
lot of people, there's the World's Fair ties in with this whole stuff.
Oh God, yeah, because it was a major cover-up of Tartaria. The World's Fair expedition was designed to take the leftover remnants and to build a new culture and say, this is this new culture that we're manifesting here. In other words, put it into the hands of American ideology and reshape it, reform it to become. It's like the secrets of Nim with the rats using human technology. It's not, and we're holding on to what was Tartarian, but it was torn apart. No one was. The only person allowed to touch the World's Fair was Helen Keller. Get it? It's too funny.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's a fun conspiracy that I enjoy too. Is that she didn't?
Oh yeah, yeah. She was just
all
a
her
doll.
handler.
The communist handlers were using her. They're like, yeah, she says that communism is the only way to fix things. That's what she said. I love it. Poor Helen.
Yeah. All right, we got another caller here. Poor Helen Keller. Hello, caller. 1 second while we patch you through. Who am I speaking with?
Okay. Talking to James.
James. All right, James. You are... I think you're on here. Yeah, you're on with Andreas. How's it going, James?
Okay. Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks, Danny. Hope you guys are doing okay.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for Andreas, or the guy. Can he tell us what was the first year that an info video or a good blog was put on the internet about Tartaria stuff?
Okay, well, the Russians had videos in like 2007. I think there was Anatoly Fomenko had a series in 2007. It wasn't in English, but it was available. Probably 2014 is when I started seeing a few people mention in forums, just kind of, vaguely, like 4chan level.
When did you first hear?
So I grew up, like, I'm Slavic, like I'm Croatian, and so I learned a lot about Taurus Bulba as a kid. I love the movie Taurus Bulba with Jules Brenner, and it's about Tartaria, the Cossacks. And so for me, it wasn't really mythological until later, but I knew the idea that it was like told to me, hey, this is not just a fairy tale. Like, no, but like it's technological. The stuff they had, like the floating house that the peasant walks into at night, and he's inside, and there's automated food and everything like that. Think about it. It's not magical. It's automated, all this stuff. So that started to hit me. And then you look into what kind of technology existed. Right. So I made one of the first like American video. I don't know if it's the first or anything, but like, I know it was a rather successful, well-seen documentary talking about revisionist history. Hindsight is 2020. I think I made in when did I make that? 2017, 2019, something like that. I forget. But 2017, I think it was, people kind of knew that Tartaria existed, but there'd been people that had talked about it for 20 years prior. I mean, the CIA.
Well, hang on. I'm sorry. That's just totally incorrect. That's just totally incorrect, mate. If you can help us out and maybe somehow get in text the name of the Russian video that you're referencing from 2007. I can let you know for sure, 2017, this the dumbest of psyops ever is really not in the zeitgeist of people who are really interested in, who would eat this stuff up.
So wait, you're saying, caller, just to be clear, you're saying you don't agree with any of this Tartaria stuff? You don't think it's real?
Absolutely not. No, this is the dumbest psyop like ever.
Why is it a psyop though? Like what specifically?
Because
like what's the end? Like what's the end goal of this?
Just the general end goal of any kind of retarded misinformation.
But when you say misinformation, though. But when you say misinformation, like what is the like? Is there some sort of like harmful? Like generally, misinformation is there some sort of like negative to it where you go like, oh, people are being hurt or harmed via this. You're like, what is that in this context?
It's that people who otherwise might have been very productive with their time is spending on this, this stupid nonsense. So
but that's like saying, but that's like saying like American Idol or something.
I don't think he's planning on saying anything too lucid, but I will try to agree with him for the sake of the show that if you look back, this 1968, the CIA were trying to use Tartaria as a psyop. There's definitely evidence that Tartaria was being used as a psyop, to your credit, but it was in order that they tried to break up the Soviet Union by inserting nationalism in its place. And that's because Tartaria was already historically something that was important to those people, and they were using folktales about it. So, I mean, you're wrong, but at the same time, you're right, because there were reasons to use it as a psychological operation, and they did, and that's true. So I'll give you.
But he was more referencing. He's off the line now. But I think he was more referencing recently.
You're talking about 2017 to 2019. I don't see the value of it as a psychological operation, except for by Alex Soros, right? Because Soros has talked about Tartaria. Dugin, Russia sees the value of it, right? So there's value to that idea that you could use this to disrupt the current status quo. But the status quo is already interrupted.
On this level, it doesn't seem like that. All right, we got another caller. Sorry to cut you off here. Oh, and I missed him. Damn it. I was just about to pick up. Well, the person, he keeps trying, so he'll call back in a moment if you want to continue your thought. But yeah. Oh, here we go. He's very, very persistent, this fella. Hello.
Hi.
You are. Hey, what's up? You're on Low Value Mail. 1 second while we patch you through to Andreas. And you are on with Andreas. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, boss. This is Cowboy.
What's up, Cowboy?
Ain't nothing to it. Hey, look, on the Civil War in Rapides Parish, which is on the Red River, it's called Rapides because the river runs into rapids. There really shouldn't be any rapids in Louisiana, and the thought is that that's a dam or an ancient dam that was originally there. During the Civil War, the Red River Campaign was stopped at Alexandria because of that dam or ancient dam.
Right. I mean, this is all true. And so it's interesting. We look at Louisiana and the Dutch and how the Dutch were part of the Spanish Empire and how the Spanish Empire were part of the Cordoba Caliphate. Now, the Cordoba Caliphate was involved with the Arabs who were involved with the Meso-Sumer and Mesoamerica, that the Sumerians lived in Mexico, essentially. And that the connection to Louisiana, that they had these giant aqueducts, like the Grand Canyon is even a part of this story. And Randall Carlson has talked about the environmental shifts and there might have been giant trees. We haven't necessarily talked about silicone trees, but even just mushrooms that would grow to be superstructures, right? These giant mushrooms that we now think of as mesas, the tops of these mountain tops that are cut. All of this is connected. Louisiana is a really amazing place. The amount of history that's in Louisiana that's been hidden, but also it's the place that floods all the time. And it was part of the Floridian Strait, right? So you've got all of the Hollow Earthers, the Koresh T group, Scientology, Henry Ford's reincarnation cult. They all sprouted out of South Louisiana and North Florida, which is, I think, very interesting. There's a lot. I mean, Ponce de Leon's Fountain of Youth story is that he was trying to get to Louisiana.
Huh. Well, like Louisiana, South Arkansas, East Texas was wiped out by the earthquake. Not the one in Tennessee. It made the river run backwards. It created the Great Raft. I don't know if you're familiar with the Great Raft, right. But the Great Raft was, they believe, was created by earthquake. But essentially, the river flowed backwards.
Right. That's
like
exactly
200
right.
miles from where it enters the Mississippi.
And I mean, the fact that there's alligators there, like the Cayman territory, like it's this ancient place that still exists. But liquefaction, we talk about mud flooding. So the idea that a lot of the civilization could have been reset because so much of it's erased when the power goes out, the books are lost. In Back to the Future, they don't have any records before the flood, right? The flood destroyed the Hill Valley records. So we have the same story across America.
You can see that happening now.
Louisiana, especially.
The attempt, well, I'm just talking about as far as like records now, we're seeing the destruction of records. We're seeing the destruction of monuments. We're seeing the consolidation of records. We're seeing them going from a physical piece of paper to a something in the ether. So we're
Just
seeing
digital,
a consolidation of that. And if that's wiped out, you're right. It doesn't take but 2 or 3 generations to go, that was all bullshit. That was granddaddy talking shit.
Right. And then it's
Doesn't
interesting
take very long.
how that evolves, because you might have had a group of people that only knew the hardware, and then that becomes part of their architectural civilization, and someone who only knew the math, and that becomes part of their language, and someone who only knew the script, and so this is the future, when someone who used to make TVs and someone who used to program TVs go to 2 different islands after the fall of Atlantis, right? We're going to see.
And it's like, how long does it take for them to basically make it back to where they started almost? Like,
yeah,
probably a while.
Well, then you got the fourth term.
I think when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and a UFO, for the lack of a better term, flew over my backyard. I live in North Louisiana. Flew over my backyard at about 50 feet or 60 feet. I could see the people in there, and I say people because I was so young, I didn't know anything other than they look like people. They could have been aliens. I don't know. But I can tell you this for a fact, that flying saucers, call them whatever you want, people with advanced technology, they exist. They are real. It's a fact.
I mean, just the idea that we're the only ones with this technology, or that the government wouldn't have 100-year ahead of us technology in order to keep us. I mean, of course, the idea of not releasing the technology they have to the public for 20 years is that, right? So they can continually have leaps and bounds ahead of us, even just there.
Well, there's a God. There really is a God. And they're taking that God out, and they're taking the belief off of something bigger. And they were the government is our God now. That's the end of everything.
I do see
guys. Thank you.
Peace.
Yeah, thank you.
Singularity is coming. He's right.
Yeah, I mean, I will say one of the crazy, or not crazy, but very shocking thing to me was listening to RFK Jr. on a podcast recently, and he's like running for president, and has a credible chance, I guess. He's polling like reasonably well, and he's just like, yeah, the CIA killed my dad and my uncle. He's like, I'm sure of it. And you're just like, crazy for him to just even say that. We got a super chat. It was a while ago from Stefan. Says, does Danny know that Jackie killed JFK? Peace and love. No? Well, that's funny that you say that.
In the picture.
Apparently it's the CIA. All right, we got another caller. We have a little more. This might be the last caller of the night, actually. Hold on one second. Hello? Hey, what's up? Can you turn down your speaker?
Oh, yep. I didn't know if I made it through or not. Is this it?
Yeah, you are on with Andreas. Who am I speaking with?
Oh, what up, guys? My name's Ryan. I just had a quick question for you. Do you guys think the Statue of Liberty was made by these Tartarians?
So the Statue of Liberty is on top of one of the Tartarian star forts. It's on an octagonal star fort. And if you look at
what's
Wall
a star
Street,
fort? Well, can you
the bastion forts, or the snowflake-like forts, the fortification structures that were part of the boat, the pier network of the sea trade to the land power. So you have star forts you travel from one star fort to another star fort the same way you travel from one port to another port. They're star ports, essentially. And
but when you say star, does that mean like we're traveling like...
It's the shape of a star.
Oh, gotcha. But you reach them by how? Water or like by air?
By boat. By boat. It's land. Okay. So you just go from one place to another place. Yeah. And of course, they also had the Silk Road. A lot of people, there were airships, there were Zeppelins, there were silk balloons. that existed also. So there was air travel, and that's another thing. If you look at Louisiana, why in the Civil War they had airships, it was because they had this technology.
So do you think the Empire State Building was also built by them?
So I mean, yes, I think the Empire State Building is. I think certain parts of the Bronx were. I think places where there were hydroelectric are. I think Minneapolis, large parts of Minneapolis. But I think a lot of it's also been destroyed. There's certain places that are still there, certain 13-story buildings, and then they destroyed a lot of New York as well because it was New Amsterdam. Wall Street used to be part of the Star Fort of New Amsterdam. If you look at the old map, you'll see it was a Star Fort, and the Wall Street gets its name because it was the wall that they broke down to get into New Amsterdam. So they broke into the Bastion Fort, and that's why we trade on Wall Street.
Huh.
Wow. When do you think this could become public knowledge?
Today, I mean, it was now. It could have been. People can know about it. It offends people because I think they want to latch on to like a British Eurocentric narrative that you're taught. It just seems really valuable to keep your education because it means you're smarter than other people or something. So people don't
I guess there's also an element of they go, okay, well then what else are we being lied to about? Like, I think if large lies come out, then it kind of shakes your kind of understanding and trust of like everything else. You go like, okay, well if these things are huge lies, you're like, what else is there?
Right. But yeah, I think the information also is subtly making it into people because we've been talking about this for years and this stuff doesn't sound that shocking anymore when I say it. I think it sounded a lot weirder when we first started looking into it, saying, hey, did you know that the Jesuits were hiding the history of, like, you can literally find the book Bellum Tartaricum, where the Jesuits explored China and they call China Tartary, because that's the last of it as far as they know. It's the last of Tartary. So we have these books from the 13th century. So it's not, but it seemed weird, I think, at the time. I mean, but it's also, it happened right at the right moment because a lot of people were ready to say, hey, I was lied to in school. Everything I was told was a lie. Maybe Netflix is right. Maybe George Washington was black. And that allowed for us to start to ask the real questions that we just figured we should never ask, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Anything else,
cool.
caller?
Well, thanks.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, that was awesome.
All right,
Keep
thank you.
Guys.
All right, thanks. Okay, we got
and love to the guy I offended. I feel bad and slaughter.
It's fine. I'm honestly like, I find it odd actually that he took it like he was generally like,
because I hear where he's coming from because he's right, because there are psyops and this is not removed from the usage of it. But I think that also kind of proves the point. The fact that the CIA was using Tartaria as a psyop in '68 kind of proves the point more than anything else to me. But it is what it is.
Yeah. Is what it is. Okay. We got a super chat from recent Tartarians. Thank you for having Andreas on. People can join his Discord for links to all evidence. Love the Collins Epic Show. Thank you. All right, last caller of the night, and then we're gonna take a break and go on to the after
to reiterate
show.
That point, do go to the tartarynova.com and look this stuff up and argue with me and each other.
Yes. Oh, sorry, we cut you off. Sorry, Andreas, you're cut off. Sorry, man. Hello.
Hello.
I fucked it. Hey, what's up?
Let the small
Andreas.
Stuff and give
Hey, Andreas, we didn't hear what you said for the last 10 seconds. I apologize. I have to get the caller on the line, but we have the last caller of the evening. Who are we speaking with?
Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello. This is Jerry.
What's up, Jerry?
What's up, Jerry?
Hey, I just had a quick follow-up question regarding the Empire State Building.
Yep.
I'm just curious what Andreas thinks about all the video footage of it being constructed. There's hours and hours of footage.
Huge amounts. So I've seen lots of photos. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the guys who were sitting up on the skyscraper on the build, with their lunch boxes, I'm not saying that didn't happen. Right. What I'm saying is that the Empire State Building, a lot like the Mormon Temple, are reconstructions or like parts of the leftover power structure edifice that was at the Empire State Building, including its basement and parts of the building on the inside, because there's part of the inner facade that the Freemasons have a cornerstone of that existed for like far further. But there are only pictures of it really being finished construction. So it's not from the, like when it's just a flat level ground either, is the other thing. So there are parts of it that were built and then they extended it and they probably fixed the original antenna tower that was destroyed. But it looks like a lot of America had towers kind of like this. For instance, San Francisco until 1906 had a really similar tower, and Chicago as well, which they ended up rebuilding with the Chicago Tower event. So there were destructions. There's lots of this place that were destroyed. And if you look, I mean, America, especially in the 19th century, you've got the complete destruction of Indianapolis, the complete destruction of Galveston, the complete destruction of Shreveport and of New Orleans, and of course 1906, California, San Francisco. You have streetcars, every kind of tower, everything else, and they burn things, saying that they can burn down these steel buildings. So certainly some of these buildings were partially wood. Had like the Japanese, they'll build a giant skyscraper and then they'll have wood on the inside for Shintoist values. So we can't be sure exactly which buildings are fully left over, but I get the feeling none of them are just the complete building that was the way it was 400 years ago or something like that. But basements, I do think a lot of these buildings are built on top of basements from these former buildings, especially the most important ones, like the Rockefeller Plaza, for instance, built on top of an older one. The Trump building, built on top of a former building.
Interesting. All right, thanks. Anything else, caller?
Yeah, well, it's just curious because, like in Detroit, for example, there was nothing there according to
Detroit was super built. There's actually some really interesting. If you go to the Masonic Lodge of Detroit, you can see a 20-foot panorama of old Detroit in the 1870s, and it was huge. What they've done to Detroit,
in the 1870s, but yeah, I'm talking about like basically in the 1830s, there was nothing there.
I disagree. I think there's a lot more in Detroit. For instance, fun fact, do you know what the name of the Detroit, what's the name of the school? Oh my God. That was at Tartar Field in Detroit where they had all the music. What's that college there?
Detroit. University of Detroit Mercy.
The Detroit Tartars were the name of the team for the Detroit school. What the heck is the name of that school?
I'm just referencing like just basic documents from before there was even government officials in Michigan, what's now Michigan, like the old
Wayne State
loggers
University.
who would come.
Wayne State University.
Yeah.
They were called the Tartars up until very recently. I think it's in the 80s. And so if you go to the most important music in all of Detroit was at the Tartar Field in Wayne State. So Tartars is a major part of the history of Detroit. Major part. It's like the mascot for Detroit were the Tartars.
Yeah, I don't doubt that the Tartars as a nation state existed, but the idea that they were in the North America, I mean, even the local Native Americans don't agree.
Well, there's that. I would disagree with that too. Look at the Ojibwa. Definitely talk about interacting with Scandinavians. And you've got the Hinckley Fire. Where
I've only dealt with the tribe up in Saginaw County, and specifically regarding the pre-Native American structures within Macomb County and Wayne County, as you said, Wayne State. There are really old stone structures that predate Native Americans.
Right, and you can look at the Vikings that went through Minneapolis.
But they're very crude structures in the sense they may be big, encompassing like 1 square acre of 6-foot tall stone walls. But that's all we have left. The local whites who moved in called them forts, and looted them. But yeah, like you said, there was stuff in Detroit, but there wasn't. I'm pretty hardcore into at least local Detroit history, and there's not much evidence there was stuff there. There was a huge Native American population. One of the tragic stories being there was a sand dune on the Detroit River there.
Yeah.
And a local guy came in, bought it, dug up all the bones for the Detroit Bone Works. So anyone who's ever listened to that, Joe Rogan mentioned the giant pile of skulls of the bison. That photo's from the Detroit Bone Works.
I would invite you to the Tartary Nova Discord. I'd like to share some stuff with you. When you look around the world for examples of, for instance, the obelisk of Ethiopia being taken by Napoleon, there's tons of examples where they demolish one city and bring the stones on a train to somewhere else. And I think Detroit's an example of that. They demolished parts of it in the 17th century into the 19th century. And they also rebuilt parts of it once they controlled the regions that they wanted to. But you can see also the interaction with the Native American tribes, because you had the Confederacy of Tribes, and the Confederacy of Tribes interacted in Canada and in America with Scandinavians. They talk about it for centuries, including the Alexandrian runestone, which they say, there was a war even at some point after the reset or whatever happened, where these tribes are interacting with each other. People are fighting over territory, and they pushed out of Minnesota the Scandinavians, who ended up in the Hudson Bay and in, ended in the Beaver Wars in Canada, which is a real thing, ironically.
Yeah. All right, thanks, caller. I gotta let you go. Thank you for calling in.
Hey, we don't go to Tartaria Nova and talk to me more, because I'd like to hear more about Detroit. I'm actually always trying to learn more about Michigan, believe it or not.
All right, so we're just gonna wrap this up really quickly. Thank you very much, everyone. We just have some super chats. Travis McClung says we promote Danny's shows on the Excertus Discord, so I guess everybody can go check out your Discord. I'll put a link in the
your Discord.
Yeah. Someone says Com1C Comic Book says they made up everything. And then I think that's all. Oh, and Maddie says, what about Baha'i temples? It's a newer religion.
Oh, my God. Good one.
All right. Well, we have a few minutes, so that's what we're going to end this on, the Baha'i temples.
So let's see.
Tell us what you know, man.
William Randolph Hearst's mother, Phoebe Hearst, became a member of the Baha'i faith, which started in Israel or Iran after an Iranian man believed that he was the new prophet after Muhammad. This is connecting to this idea that there's this new world faith. After the fall of the League of Nations, the United Nations started after Alice Bailey and Foster Bailey started the Lucis Trust. The Lucis Trust, or the Grand Lodge of the Tibetan Orient, connected to Helena Blavatsky, who was also involved with Charles Darwin. So this idea of social Darwinism and biological evolution of transcendental Marxism. So then they created a thing called the Great Invocation. The Lucis Trust, Alice Bailey, created the Great Invocation, which was this spell and ritual in order to invoke the United Nations. And out of this, Phoebe Hearst, who had become part of the Baha'i and had been spreading the word of Baha'i around the world, tried to get everyone to join it. And so a number of very important members of royal British families who had been descended from Muhammad and who had become racist against black people because blacks had been very powerful in Spain and thought that Spain, they hated the Spanish. Some British families had become Muslims in order to prepare for what they thought the Spanish Armada was going to take Britain centuries earlier. So they then converted because they'd been closet Islamicists in Britain in the 16th, 17th century until the 19th century, where they became Baha'i in the early 20th century. And then the Baha'i Church took over the United Nations Religious Theosophic Trust situation after the fall of Theosophic Society, when they lost Krishnamurti. And so now they're like the Jesuits. The Baha'i will go to, when there's like a religious argument or there's a cultural argument between two tribes, they'll bring in the Jedi Baha'i, and make them work it out between these tribes. It's this weird, I don't want to say it's creepy, but it's a weird religious order that's obsessed with the number 8 and 11, and they have their own calendar as well.
I know Dwight from The Office.
Oh, really?
The actor, Rainn Wilson, he's Baha'i.
He's a Baha'i.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I would
Because
say
that's the first time I had ever heard of it, was him referencing it.
Being Baha'i is not very socially acceptable because they're anti-homosexual. So they're not very woke these days, but they're super in charge of the world order. And Phoebe
that's
Hearst,
probably why you don't hear much from him outside of.
Yeah.
Although I saw him on a podcast recently, so maybe he's kind of getting back in the mix. Okay.
Phoebe Hearst
Thank
lived,
you.
Phoebe Hearst lived happily ever after until she died of the great influenza of 1919. Done.
Right. That's how they get you. All right. That has been the show. Where can people find you, Andreas?
Go to andreas.me or go to excertus.com, Xirtus, or go to Tartaria Nova. And watch me on Danny's show or watch my shows, because we do shows every week.
Yeah. I mean, you stream all the time on YouTube. I'm sure a lot of people know about your YouTube. And all right, that has been the show, everybody. We're going to start the after show. Thank you for coming on very much. We're going to start the after show in about 10-ish minutes. You can get access to it, patreon.com/lowvaluemail or Locals or Twitter, just everywhere. Subscribe to my Twitter or whatever, and you heard what I said. Okay, that's been the show. Tomorrow night, new episode of The Bathhouse, 10:30 p.m. live from the Stand Comedy Club Green Room. And next week we have Sarah Higdon on as the guest. She's a transgender activist, libertarian. She's cool, and she will be our guest next week. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And we're going to play it out. Say goodbye, Andreas.
God bless you.
All right, take care. Bye.
all my shit heroic. Empathic abilities, yeah, my face be also stoic. Bleep blow up, nigga, that just means I'm working. They see me as a leader, so that's why I'm Captain Kirkin. These tracks from the stars, that much is for certain. You can feel this hit if you up or if you hurtin'. I'm raising my stock, not talking my feet in some Birkin. Number Johnny 5, got a fucking short circuit. Bring the track to life when I spit phenomenal. When I hit, she feel that shit in her abdominals. These rappers make me laugh like comic view, they comical. You know I got a ball out, I hit the track running just like Sonic do. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah. They was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah. And they tried to down me up some KO type shit. Yeah. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah. Now we pulling up fresh on some flight shit. Ha. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah. They was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah. Then they tried to down me up some KO type shit. Yeah. They don't wanna turn on my light switch.